neighbors nodded politely on their morning walks. But on this particular morning, one woman did not follow the routine. She left her house just past 7, her bag slung over her shoulder, her phone in her hand, and she never came back. At first, there was confusion, then concern, then a collective dread that spread like wildfire. She wasn't the type to vanish. She had plans, a family, people who depended on her. The town began to whisper, question, suspect. But no one expected the truth to be this dark. The search began with missing posters and desperate phone calls. But soon, it unraveled into something far more terrifying, a twisted web of lies, obsession, and manipulation. A truth so grotesque that even seasoned detectives stood in stunned silence. Her killer, as it turned out, was someone everyone knew, someone she trusted, someone who had smiled at her just hours before she disappeared. This is not a story about a random act of violence. It is a story about calculated evil, cloaked in familiarity, a monster hiding behind a mask of normalcy. This case didn't just shatter one family. It shattered the illusion of safety that the entire town once held. Today, we take you inside that story. We trace every clue, examine every crack in the mask, and walk you through a timeline that feels like fiction, but is disturbingly real. Welcome to Crime Chronicles Confidential. This isn't just a mystery. It's a warning. And by the end, you'll never look at an ordinary day the same way again. March 12, 2017 began like any other chilly spring morning in Brookridge, a small town tucked between forests and winding rivers, where everyone knew each other by name and crime was nothing more than an occasional stolen bicycle. It was the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors at night, where kids played outside until sunset, where danger felt like something that happened somewhere else. But that illusion shattered the moment Emma Caldwell stepped out her front door at 7:15 a.m. She was dressed in a light blue hoodie, faded jeans, and sneakers still damp from a morning dew. Her long auburn hair was pulled into a messy bun, and she wore no makeup. She had just grabbed a slice of toast and a thermos of coffee, kissed her mother on the cheek, and said, "See you tonight." It would be the last time anyone heard her voice. Emma was headed to the town's community center, just a short walk from her home, barely 15 minutes away. She volunteered there on weekends, organizing events for children and helping seniors with digital literacy. She was loved, not just by her family, but by nearly everyone who had ever crossed her path. Responsible, grounded, always smiling. That morning, she had sent a quick text to her best friend Zoe. "Don't forget the projector cable for the workshop." And then, nothing. At 7:38 a.m., her phone pinged near Riverview Bridge, a narrow concrete span that stretched over a fast-moving river on the edge of town. It was a known landmark, peaceful during the day but deserted and unsettling in the early hours. The ping was brief. After that, her phone went completely dark. At first, nobody panicked. Maybe she forgot to charge her phone. Maybe she got busy and lost track of time. But as hours turned into an entire afternoon with no word from her, no texts, no social media activity, no calls, her mother grew anxious. She dialed Emma's number again and again, straight to voicemail. By 4 p.m., she reported her daughter missing. The town responded swiftly. Volunteers gathered in the church basement. Flyers were printed. Search parties were formed. People combed through wooded trails, parks, and empty parking lots. The bridge where her phone last pinged was searched extensively. Both banks of the river checked for any trace. A footprint, a scarf, anything. Nothing turned up. Not a single piece of clothing. Not a broken phone. Not even a sign of struggle. Emma had simply disappeared. Police initially believed it might be a case of a runaway, perhaps stress, or a secret no one knew about. But those who knew Emma laughed at the theory. She was grounded, happy. Just days before, she had submitted an application to a university psychology program. She had plans, dreams, a calendar filled with appointments and commitments. This was not a girl preparing to vanish. This was a girl preparing to live. By the second day, panic turned to fear, and fear turned into a quiet horror, the kind that grips your throat when hope begins to fade. Local news picked up the story. Journalists arrived. Friends of Emma cried during interviews. Her father, A man who had rarely shown emotion broke down on live television pleading, "If anyone knows anything, please just let her come home." But Emma did not come home. Investigators widened their net. They spoke to her teachers, classmates, neighbors, and former acquaintances. They asked about ex-boyfriends' mental health and recent changes in behavior. They scoured her social media for strange interactions, checked her laptop, searched her bedroom, every diary, every note, every late-night chat. And then they found something curious. On the Wednesday before she disappeared, Emma had searched online for how to know if you're being followed. She had also looked up self-defense tools. One search at 2:11 a.m. simply read, "What to do if you're scared but no one believes you." That changed everything. Now police wondered, had Emma seen something? Had someone threatened her? Had she confided in anyone about being in danger? Her best friend Zoe came forward with something she'd forgotten at first. A brief, almost throwaway comment Emma made the week before. "I think someone's watching me," she had whispered, "but I can't prove it." When Zoe asked who, Emma only shook her head. "It's probably nothing." But now it seemed it was everything. As the investigation deepened, Brookridge began to transform. Doors were locked, windows shut tight. Parents didn't let their children walk alone. The town's innocence had cracked. Because if someone like Emma could vanish in broad daylight, anyone could. And somewhere in that silence, her predator watched it all unfold. Because this wasn't a random act. It wasn't impulsive. It was planned, deliberate, executed with such precision that not even a thread had been left behind. Emma had vanished not because of where she was, but because of who was waiting for her. Someone she knew. Someone who knew her routine. Someone who had prepared for this moment. As search parties dwindled and days turned to weeks, only one thing became certain. The morning of March 12th was not ordinary. It was not routine. It was not safe. It was the beginning of a nightmare. One that had only just begun. At first, the streets stayed quiet. People whispered behind closed doors, unsure what to say, uncertain of what was safe. Brookridge was the kind of place where children rode bikes past sunset, where shop owners waved from behind counters, and where every face was familiar. A town of just 3,000 people. Not enough to disappear unnoticed. Not enough to hold a secret. Or so they thought. Emma Caldwell's disappearance shattered that illusion in an instant. The local grocery store stopped playing music. The mailman walked faster, eyes on the ground. Mothers clutched their children tighter at school gates. And every conversation, no matter how it began, somehow circled back to the same question. What happened to Emma? Everyone knew her. She had tutored their children, babysat their pets, volunteered at their events. She was not just a girl in a photo on a missing poster. She was part of their lives. And now she was gone. Rumors spread like wildfire, fed by silence and fear. Some said she had run away with someone older. Others believed she had a mental breakdown and was hiding in the woods. A few murmured darker things, words like kidnapping, trafficking, murder. No one wanted to say them out loud, but everyone felt them. The small-town innocence had cracked, revealing a harsh reality underneath. Panic began to seep into every corner. People double-checked their locks. Teenagers stopped going out after dark. The community Facebook group exploded with theories, photos, CCTV requests. People who had never spoken before now shared long conversations over fences, each trying to convince the other that they had nothing to hide. But behind every voice was the same unspoken thought. What if it was someone we know? Because in a town this small, the terrifying truth is that the suspect couldn't be a stranger. It had to be someone from within. Someone they passed in the post office. Someone they waved to on their morning jog. Someone who smiled. One name kept coming up in whispers. A local handyman, older, quiet, always kept to himself. He had once repaired a window in the Caldwell home. Another rumor pointed toward Emma's former teacher, who had been suspended years ago for inappropriate comments. Then there was the boy who worked at the cafe, who had once asked Emma out and been politely turned down. Each suspect came with a story. Each story came with fear. But none of it brought Emma back. The police held town hall meetings, pleading for calm. They updated the community, with what little information they had. The bridge ping, the missing phone, no new evidence, no signs of a struggle, no body. They emphasized that the investigation was active, that they were doing everything they could, but that wasn't enough. People wanted answers. And in the absence of truth, imagination filled the void. Every glance became suspicious. Every unusual movement noticed. The paranoia was quiet at first, but it grew louder with each passing day. Neighbors who had known each other for years now watched one another from behind curtains. Lifelong friendships turned into awkward silences. Even those closest to Emma began to question themselves and each other. What had they missed? Was there something she said? Something they ignored? The guilt sank deep, bitter and cold. Emma's parents stopped leaving the house except for press interviews and police meetings. Her mother stopped eating. Her father aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Their once bright home dimmed with grief, the porch light permanently left on, in case she came back. As days turned into weeks, hope transformed into something else. Not quite despair, but something heavier. Something that settled into the bones of the town and refused to leave. It changed Brookridge forever. Because now everyone knew monsters don't always come from the outside. Sometimes they live next door. Sometimes they bring you flowers. Sometimes they remember your birthday. And sometimes they already know the way to your house. That was the truth that haunted the town. Not just that Emma was gone, but that whoever took her was still out there, blending in, hiding in plain sight. And they had no idea who it was. It began with a mother's instinct. Not panic, not hysteria, just a quiet, tightening feeling in her chest that something was wrong. Emma wasn't answering her phone. Hours had passed. She hadn't shown up for her volunteer shift. No messages. No check-ins. No sign. At first, her mother told herself it was probably nothing. Maybe Emma's phone had died. Maybe she'd gone to a friend's place and forgotten to tell her. But by nightfall, the silence became unbearable. Emma's mother, Marlene, slipped on her coat and stepped out into the cold. No plan, no direction, just a name on her lips and hope in her heart. "Emma," she called, soft at first, then louder. "Emma, please, just come home." She walked the same streets Emma had taken every morning, past the bakery with the green awning, past the school where Emma once played in the yard, past the cracked sidewalk where she fell off her bike at age 10. Every corner held a memory. Every shadow felt like a threat. As the hours passed and the cold deepened, Marlene's voice grew hoarse. Her steps slowed. Her shoes, soaked from melting snow, began to blister her feet. Eventually, she took them off, walking barefoot, as if some primal act of suffering might bring her daughter back. Neighbors watched in silence. Some tried to offer help. She refused. She wasn't ready to stop searching. She couldn't stop. The house was no longer a home. It was a waiting room, a tomb for what used to be joy. Emma's room remained untouched, her bed still made, her favorite hoodie still draped over the chair. Marlene sat for hours on her daughter's floor, rocking back and forth, whispering old lullabies. Her husband, Robert, spent his nights at the window, staring out into the darkness, flinching every time a car passed too slowly. But they didn't just wait. They acted. By the next morning, the family printed flyers. Hundreds of them. Emma's smiling face, frozen in time, stared back from every telephone pole, every bulletin board, every storefront window. Missing, it read, last seen March 12, 2017. If you've seen Emma Caldwell, please call. They handed them out to strangers at gas stations, supermarkets, bus stops. Some people accepted them with pity, others with vacant indifference. But most looked away quickly. No one wanted to believe that someone like Emma could be gone. No one wanted to see the pain in her parents' eyes. The Caldwells organized search parties. They knocked on doors, searched abandoned barns, overgrown fields, riverbanks, dumpsters. Volunteers showed up, friends, classmates, even people who barely knew her. Some brought flashlights. Others brought drones. One woman baked muffins for the search teams and handed them out quietly, as if that small gesture could somehow make things better. But every path led nowhere. Every effort came up empty. And with every sunset, the hope they clung to grew more fragile. Marlene refused to sleep. She paced the house in the dark, answering phantom phone rings, refreshing her email inbox, rereading old messages Emma had sent. One night, she played a voicemail Emma had left her months ago. Just a simple, "Hey, Mom, I'm on my way home. Love you." She played it on loop until the battery on her phone died, then charged it, then played it again. Robert tried to stay strong, tried to be the pillar his wife needed. But in private, he broke down. He'd retreat to the garage, open Emma's old journals, smell the pages, run his fingers over her handwriting, and weep. Not loud, not dramatically, just quiet sobs, the kind that come from a place too deep to describe. The days blurred. They forgot to eat. They forgot to speak. Time became a strange, merciless thing, racing when they needed it to slow down, crawling when they needed answers. The police provided updates. Not much had changed. They were following leads, analyzing phone data, reviewing CCTV footage. But the words sounded hollow. The family needed results, not reassurances. Every time an officer knocked on their door, their hearts raced with a flicker of hope, only to be crushed again by the same sentence. "We're still looking." Then came the media. Reporters showed up, cameras flashing. News vans parked outside. Some were kind, gentle, respectful. Others were invasive, digging through Emma's social profiles, asking inappropriate questions. One even suggested she might have staged her disappearance for attention. Marlene almost collapsed hearing it. They gave a press conference, standing in front of a row of microphones, trembling, hollow-eyed, desperate. Marlene said, "If you're out there, Emma, please just come home. No questions asked. We love you. We forgive you. Just come home." Robert, barely holding it together, added, "If someone has her, please, I beg you, don't hurt her. Let her go. She's just a girl." But silence answered back. They turned to faith. They lit candles, attended vigils, wrote letters to God. Emma's younger brother left a toy on her bed every night, his way of letting her know he was waiting. But no miracle came. Friend began to drift away, not out of cruelty, but from discomfort. What do you say to a mother whose child is missing? How long can you offer support before the silence becomes too heavy to bear? The Caldwells were left alone with their grief, yet they kept searching. Every day, every night, rain, snow, wind, darkness. It didn't matter. Emma was out there, somewhere, and until she was found, they would not stop. But behind their determination was something else, a fear that crept in slowly, then refused to leave. What if she wasn't coming back? What if the roads they walked, the woods they searched, the bridge they passed, weren't hiding Emma at all? What if she had never made it out of town? And what if the person who took her was still watching, still waiting, still close? Because sometimes in the quiet of night, when everything else fades, the only thing left is the sound of your own thoughts whispering the one question you can never silence. What if we're already too late? On the 12th day of Emma's disappearance, the town awoke to sirens. A fire had broken out near the edge of Pinewood Trail, a wooded area just outside town limits, not far from the community center, where Emma had been heading the morning she vanished. Smoke rose slowly through the trees. It wasn't a large blaze, but it was enough to draw the attention of early morning joggers and one off-duty firefighter who happened to be nearby. The flames were quickly extinguished. No structure had burned, just a patch of dry brush and a small clearing. But something strange was found in the ash. Among the blackened soil and scorched roots, they found fabric, torn, partially melted and barely recognizable, but unmistakably cloth, pale blue in color, charred around the edges. Burned into the center was what looked like a faint, dark red stain. Emma's mother was brought in to confirm. The moment she saw it, she collapsed. It was Emma's scarf, the same scarf she wore the day she disappeared, a gift from her aunt, knitted by hand, with a tiny uneven stitch near the end that only her family would recognize. Suddenly, this wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It was something else, something darker, Investigators cordoned off the area and swept it thoroughly. Beneath the dirt, they found a delicate silver bracelet. It was broken, one end snapped clean off. Emma's initials were engraved on the inside. Her mother confirmed it had been a birthday gift. She never took it off. And then, in the nearby park, a place where children played and couples walked their dogs, a smear of blood was discovered on a bench, dried and nearly invisible. It had blended into the wood grain, gone unnoticed for days. A field test confirmed it was human. A lab later matched it to Emma's DNA. 3 items, 3 potential clues. But something didn't feel right. The burn site was too exposed, too shallow. If someone was trying to destroy evidence, why choose a place so close to a popular hiking trail? Why burn only one item of clothing? And why leave the bracelet nearby undamaged? Was it carelessness? Panic? Or was it something else entirely? Police began to consider a possibility that chilled them. What if the clues were planted? What if someone wanted them found? The idea was horrifying, that someone could be playing a game, watching the chaos unfold, leaving breadcrumbs not to help, but to control the narrative, to distract, to confuse. The bracelet was broken, but the break looked clean, almost deliberate. The scarf had only been partially burned, enough to damage it, but not enough to destroy it entirely. The blood on the bench, it was too small an amount, not enough to indicate violence. Just a trace, a smear, a message. News of the discovery sent shockwaves through Brookridge. The story exploded on local media. Reporters swarmed the area. Theories spiraled out of control. Some believed the killer was taunting the police. Others thought Emma had staged it all herself. One online post suggested the items were planted by someone trying to frame another. But through all the noise, one truth emerged. Someone had gone to great lengths to either leave a clue or leave a trap. The forensic team went over everything. The scarf contained trace elements of accelerant, gasoline. The bracelet had tiny fibers embedded in the clasp, possibly from gloves. The blood was real, but there were no fingerprints nearby, no shoe prints, no tire tracks. It was as if someone had hovered in midair and vanished into the trees. Even the surrounding vegetation seemed undisturbed. No signs of struggle, no signs of panic, just items, quietly, almost respectfully placed. The detective leading the case, Lisa Harrow, called it the most deliberate crime scene I've ever encountered, and yet the most empty. She knew something wasn't right. She knew they were being led somewhere. But by whom and why? That night, Emma's father sat alone in the dark, holding the broken bracelet in his hand. He stared at the engraved letters, tracing them with his thumb until his skin went numb. He couldn't help but wonder, had she died here? Was this the last place she ever stood? Or was this the killer's theater, and they were merely the audience? Marlene, Emma's mother, couldn't bring herself to look at the scarf again. She placed it in a sealed bag, locked in a drawer, and whispered to herself, "This isn't where it ends." But for many in Brookridge, it felt like the beginning of something far more terrifying. Because now, the town wasn't just haunted by a disappearance. It was being manipulated by someone who understood fear, someone who understood spectacle, someone who wanted them to follow a trail of ashes and blood, a predator with patience, a mind that calculated every detail, someone who knew how to make it look like a clue, while hiding the real truth underneath. The discovery reignited the investigation with new urgency. Canvassing resumed. Every tip was re-examined. Every known person in Emma's life was questioned again, this time with sharper focus. But one thing became clear. The person they were looking for wasn't reckless. They weren't sloppy. They were smart. And they were always 2 steps ahead. Because sometimes the scariest part of crime isn't what you find. It's what you're meant to find. And what that means about who you're up against. With every day that passed, the calm surface of Brookridge cracked further, and what spilled out was something no one was prepared for. The discovery of Emma's scarf, bracelet, and blood-stained bench had reignited the town's anxiety. But it did something else, too. It turned everyone into a suspect. In a town where everyone knew each other, suddenly no one could be trusted. And as investigators dug deeper, they began to realize this wasn't just a case about a missing girl. This was a case about the secrets people carry in silence. Everyone had a version of Emma: the best friend, the ex-boyfriend, the neighbor, the teacher. They had stories, smiles, memories. But when detectives looked closer, the stories began to change. And beneath the surface of each familiar face lay something darker. Zoe Monroe was Emma's closest friend. They had grown up together, finished each other's sentences, wore matching necklaces, and had once promised to be each other's maids of honor. Zoe was the first to speak to police, the first to organize search parties, the first to cry in front of cameras. But her interviews raised subtle red flags. She contradicted herself about the last time she saw Emma. She insisted they had no recent arguments, but texts told a different story. One message, sent just days before Emma vanished, read, "You're keeping something from me, and I don't like it." When asked what it meant, Zoe hesitated, then said she didn't remember. But detectives did. Then there was Tyler Reed, Emma's ex-boyfriend. They had dated for 2 years, broken up 6 months prior, but were reportedly still on good terms. At least, that's what he told police. But his browser history showed something else. Late-night visits to Emma's social media, searches for how to track someone's location without them knowing, and repeated views of old videos she'd posted. When confronted, Tyler grew defensive. He claimed it was just curiosity, nostalgia. But when police asked about his whereabouts the morning Emma disappeared, he stammered, said he'd gone for a run. Alone, no GPS record, no witness, just his word. Police also learned that Emma had blocked him on 2 platforms just weeks before she vanished. Something had changed. But what? Next came George Ellison, the quiet neighbor who lived across the street from the Caldwells. Retired, widowed, known for trimming his hedges at exactly 6 a.m. every morning. He often waved Emma, had even baked her cookies once. To most, he was harmless. But a neighbor reported seeing him watching Emma from his window, often for long periods of time. When detectives visited his home, they found dozens of surveillance photos, not taken by him, he insisted, but printed, collected, stashed in a box under his bed. Many were of Emma, some zoomed in, some taken from across the street, some from much closer. Then came the most unexpected name, Mr. Caleb Myers, Emma's former history teacher. Charming, well-liked, funny. He'd once won Teacher of the Year, but his past held shadows. For years ago, a quiet complaint had been filed by a student. Inappropriate messages, late-night emails. Nothing overt, nothing criminal. The complaint was dropped. No proof, but the whispers never really stopped. When questioned about Emma, he seemed confident, said she had been one of his brightest students, that he admired her, that she had a future. But when asked why she'd visited his classroom after graduation, twice unannounced, he hesitated. He claimed they were innocent conversations, but he couldn't remember what they talked about. And then there was a note, found in Emma's journal, scribbled on a page with no date. "Someone at school creeps me out. I don't know if it's just in my head, but I avoid the 3rd floor when I can." Mr. Myers' classroom was on the 3rd floor. Each of these people, Zoe, Tyler, George, Myers, had a story. Each had access, motive, opportunity, but none had proof. Detectives mapped out their timelines. They rechecked alibis. Some began to fall apart. One by one, they were called in again, questioned longer, pushed harder. And under that pressure, cracks began to form. Zoe confessed she and Emma had been fighting. She admitted jealousy. Emma had been pulling away, spending time with someone Zoe didn't like, someone she wouldn't name. She said it was nothing, just a falling out. But in her eyes, detectives saw something else, guilt. Tyler admitted he had tried to contact Emma the day she disappeared. She hadn't answered. He'd driven by her house once, maybe twice, just to see if her light was on, he claimed. He said he never got out of the car. But security footage from a neighbor's camera showed a vehicle matching his at the corner of Pinewood Trail at 7:41 a.m. George claimed the photos weren't his, that he'd found them online, that he didn't take them. But none of the images existed online. They were all originals, printed on high-quality paper, stored carefully, obsessively. And Mr. Myers? He refused further questioning, lawyered up, left town for a mental health retreat. He never returned. None of them confessed. None of them were arrested. But the fear had changed form. It was no longer just a fear of Emma being gone. It was a fear that someone close to her had done it, and was still walking free, still smiling, still shaking hands at church, still waving at the grocery store, still saying, "What a tragedy," with the same breath they used to say, "Good morning." Because in a case like this, it's not always a monster in the dark you have to fear. Sometimes it's the one you already know, the one you used to trust, the one whose secrets are just now starting to unravel. The house had grown quiet. It had been 34 days since Emma Caldwell vanished, and her room had become a shrine, untouched, still carrying her scent, still frozen in time. Her mother refused to let anyone clean it. Her bed remained perfectly made, her books still arranged in their color-coded order, her phone charger still hanging off the edge of the nightstand, waiting for a phone that would never come home. That was where the detective found it. During a secondary sweep of the home, at the urging of the lead investigator, the team decided to search Emma's bedroom one more time. Not for physical evidence. They had already combed every inch. But for insight, for psychology, for pieces of her mind. Sometimes, understanding the victim helps you understand the predator. Behind a stack of textbooks, wedged between an old yearbook and a journal with a broken spine, was a small, hand-stitched notebook. Purple fabric cover, worn edges. Inside, page after page of cursive handwriting, drawn in soft blue ink. Emma's diary. What began as a record of ordinary days, study notes, friend drama, jokes, dreams about college, quickly shifted tone. Somewhere around page 48, the entries began to darken. March 1st, I feel like I'm being watched. March 3rd, I saw the same car again. Parked across the street for the second night in a row. Lights off, engine running. March 6th, Zoe says I'm overreacting. But something doesn't feel right. I keep hearing footsteps behind me, but no one's there. Maybe I'm just tired. March 8th, I told him to stop. He smiled and said I was imagining things. I wasn't. Then, on March 10th, just 5 days before she vanished, one line, written shakily, stretched across the center of the page. If anything happens to me, don't trust him. There was no name, no context, just that, 5 words. A final whisper from the edge of disappearance. The room fell silent as the detective read aloud. Emma's mother collapsed into tears, clutching the diary to her chest. Her father turned pale. The officers looked at one another, each of them silently asking the same question. Who was him? It changed everything. The diary shifted the case from a wide investigation into a focused hunt. The tone changed. The urgency deepened. Because this wasn't just a disappearance anymore, it was a warning. Emma had known something. She had seen something. She had feared someone. And now, she was trying to speak from beyond that silence. Investigators retraced every entry. They built a timeline of people Emma had interacted with in those final days. Friends, classmates, online messages, teachers, neighbors. Every him was evaluated. Every male in her orbit was brought back into question. Zoe was re-interviewed. This time, she was shown the diary. Her face went blank. Then defensive. She claimed she didn't know who Emma meant. She insisted they hadn't talked about anything serious in those last days. But her hands shook. Her eyes darted. She asked to leave the room 3 times during questioning. Tyler was called in next. Shown the line. He stared at it for nearly a full minute, saying nothing, then muttered, "That could be anyone." He laughed nervously. Girls say stuff like that all the time. But when detectives asked if Emma had ever accused him of following her, he grew quiet. He said no, but the silence between his answers said otherwise. Mr. Myers was unreachable, out of state, possibly out of the country. The school claimed he was on an extended leave, no return date provided. George Ellison, the neighbor with the photographs, denied everything, said Emma never spoke to him, that she smiled occasionally, that was all. But when asked if she'd ever confronted him, His jaw twitched. He stammered. And then he said something that changed the course of the interview. She was paranoid. The room went cold. He had used the past tense. Detectives leaned in, asked him to clarify. He repeated himself. She was paranoid. When reminded that Emma was still listed as a missing person, not deceased, he corrected himself, but it was too late. The diary revealed more in the entries that followed. March 9th, I can't sleep. Every sound makes me jump. Every shadow looks like him. I wish I had told someone sooner. March 10th, I saw him again today. He pretended not to see me, but I know he did. He always does. Every time I look up, he's already watching. The pattern was unmistakable. Emma was spiraling. She was scared, and she didn't feel safe telling anyone, because maybe she didn't know who she could trust, and maybe the person she feared the most was someone trusted by everyone else. The diary was submitted for forensic analysis. Hidden between the pages, written faintly in the margin of one entry, were initials, barely legible, like an afterthought. CM. The initials matched only one person in her immediate circle. Caleb Myers, the teacher, the charming, respected, well-liked figure who had suddenly vanished after police questioning. Now, the diary wasn't just a warning. It was evidence, probable cause, a whisper of the truth. The hunt for Myers began. Warrant issued. Passport flagged. The media released his photo. Tips flooded in from neighboring states. People swore they'd seen him in diners, rest stops, gas stations. None of the sightings panned out. But one thing had become crystal clear. Emma had tried to speak. She had left a trail. Quiet, hidden, scattered in the pages of a book no one had thought to open. And now, even in her silence, she was leading them, one line at a time, one secret at a time. And one day, maybe soon, to the man who took everything from her, from the beginning. He was everywhere. He stood in front of the missing posters with tears in his eyes. He lit candles at every vigil, spoke gently to reporters, offered rides to volunteers. He held Emma's mother's hand during press conferences. He even helped organize fundraisers for the search efforts. To the public, he was a symbol of support, the grieving friend who had lost someone precious, a young man showing extraordinary compassion. But to detectives, something about him didn't sit right. His name was Ryan Geller, 23 years old, a former classmate of Emma's. They'd attended the same high school, had overlapping friend groups, and had briefly worked together at a local bookstore 2 summers ago. According to him, they had remained close friends since. But the diary told a different story. Emma hadn't mentioned Ryan once. Not by name, not by nickname, not even in passing. In a journal where she detailed everything from late-night snacks to paranoid suspicions, Ryan was noticeably and oddly absent. Yet here he was, crying on camera, holding Emma's picture, standing behind her mother at every press event, and always watching. His eyes moved constantly, during interviews, during gatherings, even when he was supposedly praying or reflecting. They shifted left and right, scanned faces, lingered just a moment too long. Detectives noticed. The behavior was subtle, not overt, but enough to make them look deeper. They pulled his phone records. In the 2 months before Emma's disappearance, Ryan had messaged her over 30 times. She had responded only once, and even then it was brief. A simple thanks, "I'm good," in response to him offering to drive her home one night. The remaining messages went unanswered. Some were harmless. "Hey, haven't seen you in a while." Some were persistent. "You okay? You haven't replied." And some grew unsettling. "Are you ignoring me on purpose? You think you're better than everyone now? We used to be close. What happened?" One message, dated March 7th, read, "I saw you walking today. You looked scared. You don't have to be scared of me." Emma had never replied. Detectives brought Ryan in for a second interview, this time under more formal circumstances. He smiled nervously, claimed he had nothing to hide, that he was just doing his best to help. But when shown the messages, the smile faded. He said he had a crush on her once. Years ago. It was nothing serious, he added. We were just close. I cared about her. That's why I'm involved. I want her found. But there was something else. When asked where he was the morning Emma disappeared, Ryan said he was asleep, alone, no one to verify, no digital trail, no GPS data, no security footage placing him elsewhere. Then came the footage from Parkview Cafe. Surveillance from a morning of March 12th, the day Emma vanished, showed Ryan sitting by the window with a coffee. The timestamp read 7:52 a.m., just 20 minutes after Emma's phone pinged near the bridge. He had never mentioned it. When confronted, he shrugged. I forgot. I was there a lot. But the footage showed more than just Ryan sipping coffee. It showed him looking out the window, repeatedly, at something or someone across the street, a figure just barely visible on the edge of the frame. Female, long hair, blue scarf. Emma? The quality wasn't good enough to be certain, but the timing was chilling. Why had he been there? Why hadn't he said so before? And why did he keep inserting himself into the investigation? Detectives began to review footage from the vigils, press events, and community searches. And a pattern emerged. Ryan was always in the background, sometimes comforting Emma's parents, sometimes watching the crowd, sometimes staring directly into the camera. Even when he didn't know it was rolling, it was as if he wanted to be seen. Or maybe as if he wanted to see who else was watching. And then came the tipping point. Emma's younger brother, only 10 years old, told his father one night that Ryan had come to their house the week before Emma disappeared. He said he brought cookies and stayed for nearly an hour. He remembered because Ryan asked to go into Emma's room to look at an old photo. He had said Emma wasn't home. No one else was with him in the room. Detectives returned to the house, re-examined Emma's bedroom. Fingerprints were found on the doorknob, the closet handle, the inside of the window latch. They matched Ryan's. He had never mentioned being in her room. When brought in for questioning a third time, Ryan grew agitated. He claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that he had been helping the family, that he'd only gone into her room for a moment, but his voice trembled. His story shifted. He contradicted himself. The interview was suspended, but the suspicion had crystallized. Ryan Geller wasn't just grieving. He was hiding something. What that was, no one knew yet. Not entirely. But as investigators pieced together Emma's final days, they began to see him differently. Not as a friend, not as a bystander, but as someone too close, too emotional, too involved. He had cried on camera, lit candles, held hands. But behind the performance was something colder, something calculating. And the most haunting part wasn't what he said. It was that he always showed up first, before the news spread, before others arrived, before the police even made announcements. Ryan always seemed to know where to be, and that was no longer a coincidence. It was a pattern, one they could no longer ignore. For weeks, investigators had pored over footage from every camera in and around Brookridge, traffic lights, storefronts, gas stations, even home security systems. Thousands of hours, hundreds of empty roads, closed shops, motionless trees under moonlight. Most of it led nowhere, until one detective, exhausted, half asleep in the department's dim-lit back office, found something strange. It was grainy, low resolution, pulled from an old motion-activated security camera mounted on the side of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building had been shut down for years, and the camera wasn't even supposed to be functional. But somehow it had recorded on March 12th at 2:41 a.m. The footage was silent, colorless, riddled with static, but it showed something. A figure, barely visible, just a shadow at first, moving slowly across the parking lot. Slouched posture, medium build, hood pulled tight. The camera only caught him from the side for less than 6 seconds before he slipped out of frame, swallowed by the dark alley that led toward Pinewood Trail, where Emma's scarf had been found. The timestamp confirmed it. This was 5 hours before Emma vanished, and no one had ever reported seeing anything at that location at that time. The footage had sat unnoticed for over a month. The figure wasn't doing anything overtly suspicious. No breaking and entering, no weapons, no evidence in his hands. just walking, but something about it felt wrong. The time, the location, the direction he was going. It didn't line up with any known resident, delivery schedule, or police patrols. No reason to be there. Not at 2:41 in the morning. Not alone. Detectives enhanced the footage, ran it through AI software to stabilize the blur, isolate the gait, identify any facial features. There were none, but the movement, the way the person walked, was familiar. They compared it to previous footage, vigil footage, town events, parking lot cameras from 2 months ago, and one match came alarmingly close. Ryan Geller. Same height, same frame, same walk, a subtle right leg drag. Detectives reviewed footage of Ryan carrying boxes at the community fundraiser. He had the same shuffle, the same slight lean to the left, a small limp, maybe an old injury. And now, possibly a signature. When confronted with the footage, Ryan didn't deny it was him. He didn't confirm it either. He stared at the screen for a long time, then asked, "What if I was just out for a walk?" Detectives pressed further. "Why there? Why that time?" He said he couldn't sleep. Said he sometimes walked when he had anxiety. Said it didn't mean anything. But his story shifted again. The first time they interviewed him, he claimed to have been home all night. Now, he was saying he might have been walking near the warehouse, near Pinewood Trail, at 2:41 a.m., the same trail that led to the park bench, to the scarf, to the bracelet, and perhaps to Emma. They asked him what direction he went after that. He said he didn't remember. They asked him if he saw anyone. He said no. They asked him why he didn't tell them this earlier. He said he didn't think it was important. It was more than suspicious. It was possibly the only time he slipped. Until that moment, Ryan had been cautious, present, but never too close, emotional, but not dramatic. He made himself useful, played the friend, acted just enough like a victim to blend in. But now, he had placed himself near the scene, at an hour when no one should have been there, in a place no one had looked. And even worse, he never expected the camera to still be recording. The warehouse owner was contacted. He confirmed the building had no power. But the camera? Battery operated. Left behind by the previous security company. Forgotten. A ghost in the system. If the camera had failed an hour earlier, the footage would be gone forever. It was a sliver of truth. A moment of carelessness. A ghost print in a case full of silence. The footage was shown to Emma's parents in private. Her mother watched it once and had to leave the room. Her father stared for 5 minutes without blinking. He whispered, "That's him. I always thought it was him." But thought isn't proof. Not in court. Not in law. The footage was circumstantial. Blurry. Lacking facial ID. But it was something. It changed the direction of the investigation. Police returned to the area. Searched the alley. Dug into dumpsters, manholes, drain pipes. And they found something else. A torn backpack strap, buried beneath dirt, matching the description of the bag Emma carried the day she disappeared. Nearby, a shattered phone screen. Burnt, water damaged, almost beyond recognition, but with one traceable component left intact. The SIM card. It matched Emma's phone number. That shadowy figure at 2:41 a.m.? He hadn't just walked by. He had moved something, hidden something, covered his tracks. But he missed a detail. A battery, a wire, a recording he didn't know still existed. It wasn't enough to arrest him. Not yet, but it was enough to watch him closely. Enough to tighten the circle. Enough to make him sweat. Because the one thing predators hate more than exposure is unpredictability. And now, for the first time, the predator didn't know what the police would find next. And for the first time, he wasn't the only one watching. It began with a quiet tip, anonymous, typed and mailed to the station. Just 7 words. Check the west wall of the garage. No name, no return address, no fingerprints, nothing to suggest where it came from. But the timing was impossible to ignore. The footage, the broken alibi, the diary, the pieces were forming a pattern. And now this note. A single sentence that would blow open the entire case. The address was already familiar. Ryan Geller. The garage had been searched once before. Casually, superficially. A quick glance or obvious signs. Nothing suspicious at first glance. Tools, lawnmower, paint cans, old boxes, neatly stacked shelves. Everything labeled. Everything clean. Too clean. But now, with new purpose and a warrant in hand, investigators returned. They measured the wall from inside and out, 10 feet across, 6 feet tall. But the interior dimensions didn't match the exterior. A gap, exactly 16 inches deep, spanning the full width of the rear wall, covered by plywood, painted to match the rest. Seamless, almost, behind a rusted tool cabinet, slightly offset from the others. They found it, a faint groove, a hairline separation, dust disturbed, slightly uneven. When they moved the cabinet aside and tapped the wall, the hollow echo confirmed it. False wall. With tools in hand, they pried it open, and behind it was a hidden space. Not a full room, just a crawl-sized compartment, 4 feet deep, 2 feet high. But what it contained changed everything. At the back, under a folded blanket, sat a small metal lockbox. It wasn't locked. Inside were 4 items, seemingly random, but each one whispered something unspeakable. First, a leather-bound journal. Not Emma's. This one belonged to Ryan. Inside, he had written hundreds of pages. Some were rambling, chaotic, obsessive. Others were detailed, lists of Emma's routines, her favorite places, her schedule, even her clothing. One entry read, Monday, blue scarf, black boots. She smiled at 7:12. Another read, she doesn't know I'm still watching. Second, a pair of black gloves, thin and worn at the fingertips. One had a faint reddish stain on the palm. Later testing would confirm it was blood. Human, female. Third, a USB drive. When opened, investigators found dozens of images. Most were surveillance-style photos of Emma, taken without her knowledge, walking home, sitting at the park, laughing with friends. One image, dated 2 days before she vanished, showed her looking directly at the camera, wide-eyed, caught off guard, startled, scared. But it was the 4th item that broke the case open. A single silver earring, delicate, with a teardrop-shaped blue stone, identical to the one Emma was wearing the day she disappeared. Her mother confirmed immediately. It was part of a pair her grandmother gave her. She never left the house without them. One earring had been found in her room. This was the other. Now there was no doubt. Emma had been in that garage. Ryan had lied. He hadn't just watched her. He hadn't just followed her. He had brought her there. What happened inside that garage was still unclear. But it wasn't just obsession anymore. It wasn't just stalking. It was physical, real, and very, very deliberate. Police secured the scene. Forensics arrived. Every inch of the space was photographed, swabbed, documented. Fingerprints on the box. Skin cells on the gloves. Hair fibers near the wall. One strand, auburn long, matched Emma's DNA. Detectives interviewed Ryan again. This time, they didn't ask questions. They showed him photos of the journal, the USB, the earring. He stared blankly, blinked once, then said, "You don't know the whole story." But he refused to say more. His lawyer stepped in. The interrogation ended. Ryan was arrested that night, but not for murder. Not yet. For now, unlawful surveillance. Possession of stolen personal property. Obstruction of a criminal investigation. Charges they could prove immediately, while the rest was built piece by piece. But in the quiet of the evidence room, where the earring lay under glass, detectives felt something shift. This wasn't just a break in the case. This was the core. The place where obsession became control. Where fantasy became reality. Where watching from afar had turned into pulling her in. The hidden space in Ryan's garage wasn't just storage. It was a shrine, a secret world he had built around her. A place where he could pretend she was his. Not in life, but in proximity. In possession. In the smallest stolen things. And maybe, in the worst, unthinkable way, in death. Back at the Caldwell home, Emma's mother sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring out the window. She hadn't spoken in hours. Her hands clutched the matching earring, the one Emma had left behind. Her father stood behind her, trembling with rage and grief. He had it all along, he whispered. The horror wasn't just what they had discovered. It was that the answers had been this close the entire time. That while the town searched rivers, forests, and fields, Emma's truth was locked inside plywood and silence. Behind a wall, in the garage of a man they thought they knew. A man who cried, who lit candles, who held their hands while hiding the final piece. The discovery changed the case. It changed the family. And it changed Brookridge forever. Because now they understood. Sometimes evil doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. And sometimes it builds a room, just big enough to hide everything that matters. The room was cold. Gray walls. One flickering overhead light. A steel table that reflected the pale skin of the man sitting across from the detectives. Ryan Geller sat slouched, his fingers intertwined, eyes bloodshot from either lack of sleep or too much of it. He had been in holding for 16 hours. No charges for murder yet. But the weight of something much heavier hung in the air. He hadn't spoken since he arrived. Not a word. He just watched, observed, measured the room, measured the officers. Detectives Harrow and Pierce entered the room without speaking. They placed a plain folder on the table in front of him. Thick, heavy, evidence, photos, reports, pieces of the puzzle he thought he had destroyed. Still, he said nothing. Pierce started gently. "We're not here to trap you, Ryan. We just want to talk. You've been cooperative so far. We appreciate that. This is your chance to help us understand." Ryan's gaze didn't move. Harrow leaned forward. "You said you were Emma's friend. You said you cared about her. If that's true, then you need to help us fill in the blanks. She's still missing. Her family is still suffering." Ryan's jaw clenched. Then finally, quietly, he spoke. "I didn't kill her." His voice cracked slightly, but his expression stayed calm. Pierce nodded slowly. "Okay, let's start with what you did do." Silence. "You said you hadn't seen her that morning, but we have footage placing you near Pinewood Trail at 2:41 a.m. Why were you there?" Ryan shrugged. "I already told you. I walk when I can't sleep." Harrow slid the folder closer, opened it, pulled out a photo, Emma's earring, the one found behind the false wall. Then explained this. Found in your garage, in a lockbox, along with your journal, with entries about her clothing, her routines, her smile. Ryan blinked. "I didn't put it there." "Who did?" "I don't know. Someone broke into your house, built a secret wall in your garage, planted her belongings inside, then just left?" He didn't answer. Emma's DNA was found on one of the gloves. Fibers from her scarf were recovered from the same blanket you folded over the lockbox. Still nothing. "Ryan, this is the moment to tell the truth," Harrow said, voice low. "Because what happens next, whether you're seen as a monster or a man who made a mistake, depends on what you say right now." Ryan's lips parted slightly. I just wanted her to notice me again. Like before. She changed." "Changed how?" "She stopped talking to me. She started treating me like I was a stranger. I wasn't trying to hurt her." "So what were you trying to do?" He didn't respond. Pierce pulled another photo from the folder. Not the earring, not the scarf, but the image from the USB drive, the one where Emma was looking directly into the camera, startled, afraid, frozen in that moment of realization. He placed it gently in front of Ryan. "Where did you take this from?" Ryan's eyes locked onto the photo. And then the first visible crack. His hands began to tremble. His breathing changed, shorter, sharper. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. "You took it, didn't you?" Harrow pressed. "You followed her that day. You got close. She saw you." "No," he muttered, barely audible. "You waited for her to be alone. You planned it, every detail. You had the gloves, the wall, the tools. You were obsessed with her. I didn't kill her." Ryan suddenly screamed, slamming his palms on the table, sending the photo skidding to the floor. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted her to understand." The room went still. He was shaking now. Pierce didn't move. He let the silence grow heavy. You just wanted her to understand what? Ryan stared down at his hands. She wouldn't listen, he whispered. I told her. I tried. She said I made her uncomfortable, that she didn't want to talk anymore. But I knew she was lying. I could see it in her eyes. She still cared. She just didn't know how to say it. You followed her, didn't you? Harrow asked softly. You waited for the right moment. Ryan looked up, his eyes filled with something between rage and grief. She was supposed to talk to me that day. I thought, if I could just get her to stop, just to listen. She always walked by so fast. So you intercepted her? I didn't hurt her. Then where is she? I don't know. His voice cracked now, raw. I panicked. She tripped. She screamed. I covered her mouth. Just for a second. I told her to stop, but she kept fighting. I didn't mean to. He stopped mid-sentence. Realized what he was saying. Pierce's voice was calm. What didn't you mean to do, Ryan? Ryan buried his face in his hands. I didn't mean to make her stop breathing. For the first time, they had it, a partial confession. No body, but enough to charge him. The mask had finally cracked, not in a scream, not in rage, but in quiet, breaking sorrow. The sorrow of a man who had built an illusion so carefully, only to watch it collapse under the weight of truth. Outside the room, the hallway buzzed with urgency. Prosecutors were already being briefed. The judge was preparing a warrant for further search. A team was assembling to search new potential dump sites based on Ryan's phone GPS. Inside the room, Ryan sat still, alone, his voice barely above a whisper now. She was the only one who saw me. And with those words, he revealed everything, because for him, it had never been about love. It had been about control, about not being invisible, about forcing someone to notice, even if it meant ending their life to keep the illusion intact. It happened on the third day of interrogation. Ryan had been kept in a solitary cell overnight, under constant watch. No phone, no visitors, no windows, just time. Time to sit with his thoughts, time to replay every step, time to listen to the silence grow louder in his mind. Detectives didn't rush. They waited, and Wade was brought back into the room the next morning, his hair disheveled, his eyes sunken, his voice hoarse. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. He didn't deny. He simply looked down at his hands, like they still carried the weight of her. And then, slowly he started to talk. She wasn't supposed to be scared, he whispered. Detective Harrow sat across from him again, recorder running, pen still, waiting. I just wanted to talk. That's all. Just talk. She'd been ignoring me for weeks. You saw the messages. Harrow didn't interrupt. She walked past me like I was nothing, like I wasn't even real, but I knew she saw me. She always did, even in high school. She used to say hi, used to smile. I thought maybe she just needed a reminder that I still mattered. He took a shaky breath. I waited near the trail. I didn't plan to do anything. I just wanted her to stop. What happened when she saw you? Harrow asked gently. She panicked. He looked away, jaw clenched. She turned to run. I grabbed her arm. I told her to wait. Just wait. She fought me. She hit me. Screamed. I panicked. And then I covered her mouth. He paused. She bit me. He held up his hand, showing a faded mark near his thumb. I pushed her. She fell, hit the back of her head on a rock. I froze. She wasn't moving. I thought maybe she was dead. But she wasn't. Ryan nodded, slowly. No. She opened her eyes. She was crying. She looked at me like I was a monster. He swallowed hard. I told her I was sorry. I kept saying it, over and over. I didn't know what to do. I tried to help her stand. She collapsed again. She was bleeding, breathing funny. He looked back at Harrow now, eyes wide, voice distant. She said, "Please make it stop." She begged me, said she didn't want to feel it anymore. "And what did you do?" Ryan's voice dropped to a whisper. I put my hands on her neck, gently. I told her it would be over soon, that she wouldn't suffer. There was a long silence in the room. And then She stopped moving. No emotion, no breakdown, just flat truth, like he was describing someone else's memory. A story he had rehearsed in his head 1,000 times until it stopped feeling real. Harold looked down at her notepad, flipped to the corner where the coroner's report was clipped. The truth was far worse. "Ryan," she said carefully, "we found Emma's body last night." He didn't react at first, just stared. She wasn't buried. She was placed inside a drainage pipe near the edge of the industrial zone, wrapped in a tarp, weighted with bricks. You covered her with leaves, left her there. Ryan closed his eyes. She looked peaceful. "No," Harold replied, her voice sharpening for the first time. She didn't. She placed the autopsy report on the table. She had defensive wounds on her arms and face, broken fingernails, bruises on her wrists, petechiae in both eyes, signs of prolonged struggle. Ryan's mouth twitched. "You said she begged you to end it." He nodded, but the autopsy shows she fought to the very last second. Scratched, kicked, bit. Her body tells a different story. "I was helping her." "No," Harold said firmly. "You were silencing her." The statement hit the air like a crack of thunder, because here, finally, was a twist, the fracture in his carefully constructed lie. He wanted to be seen as merciful, compassionate, tragic, but the evidence told a darker truth. There was no mercy in what he did, no moment of kindness, no whispered agreement between predator and victim. There was only control, and the desperate, terrified fight of a young woman who wanted to live. And even in her final breath, she resisted. Ryan shifted in his seat, his expression breaking for the first time, not in guilt, but in fear. Fear that the narrative he had tried to write, the tragic misunderstanding, the accidental death, the mercy killing had unraveled, because the body spoke louder than his words. And her story, the one he had tried so hard to bury, had survived him. "I didn't mean to," he said again, barely audible. Harold stood. "But you did. And she died knowing exactly what you are." Ryan was left alone. Later that afternoon, detectives called Emma's parents. They were brought in privately, away from the cameras, away from the press. They were told about the confession, the body, the evidence. They didn't speak for a long time. Her mother clutched the earring they had found. Her father stared out the window, his hands trembling. He said she begged for it to end. Her mother finally whispered, "Yes, she would never give up." "We know," because that's what the autopsy revealed. Not just trauma, but defiance. Even in her last moment, Emma Caldwell refused to disappear quietly. And in that refusal, she left behind the truth that cracked Ryan's story, the truth that brought him to justice, the truth that made her more than just a victim. It made her a voice, one that, even in death, still refused to be silenced. The human mind is a complex thing, layered, shifting, unpredictable. When someone commits an act as monstrous as Ryan Geller did, society reaches for explanations. Trauma, mental illness, rage, some deep-rooted damage that might justify the unthinkable. But in Ryan's case, there was none of that. No abuse in his childhood, no violent history, no drug use, no psychiatric breakdown, no moment of madness. Just a quiet, distant man with a clean record, a quiet job, and a face that blended in. So when the court-appointed forensic psychologist was called in, she expected something unusual, a pattern, a diagnosis. But what she found disturbed her more than any psychosis could. He wasn't insane. He wasn't broken. He was bored. In a series of interviews, Ryan spoke calmly, eerily so. He described his life as flat, predictable, empty. He said he woke up every morning with the same thoughts, ate the same food, saw the same people, felt the same nothing. "I was fading," he said once, "just walking through my life like I didn't exist." But there was one thing that made him feel real. Emma. He described her like a character from a book, idealized, exaggerated, never truly human in his words. He said she had energy, that she was light in a room full of gray. He spoke about the way she laughed, the way she moved, as if he had memorized her, as if she belonged to him. She didn't even know how much she meant to me, he said. Not once did he refer to her as an individual with a will, a mind, or freedom. She was a symbol, a cure for his boredom, a fixation. The psychologist wrote in her report, Mr. Geller exhibits traits of narcissistic and antisocial personality features, but not in the typical overt way. He is not impulsive. He is not chaotic. He is calculating, detached, emotionally flat, but capable of deep obsessive thought, particularly when he feels invisible or rejected. His motivations are rooted not in rage, but in existential emptiness. He didn't kill out of hate. He didn't kill out of anger. He killed to feel. I wanted something to change, he told her in one session. I wanted to experience something real, something that made my heart beat again. And when asked if he ever loved Emma, he hesitated. I don't know what love feels like, he said. What he did feel was possession, control. He said following her gave him focus. Watching her gave his life structure. Planning the moment gave him purpose. In his twisted world, it wasn't violence. It was intimacy. The psychologist noted. He speaks of the murder not with remorse, but with eerie calm, as if describing a movie he once watched. There is no empathy, no awareness of what he took, no sorrow, only the lingering belief that what he did gave his life meaning. This was the most chilling part of all. Not that he snapped, but that he prepared, that he moved methodically, built a wall in his garage, collected her belongings, organized them, cataloged them, treated his crime like a project, a ritual, a way to manufacture sensation in an otherwise numb existence. And once it was over, he went back to pretending. He cried at vigils, hugged her family, played the friend. Because for him, the murder was not the end of the story. It was the climax of his fantasy, and the aftermath was just as important. Being there, being seen, being in the center of grief, it kept the feeling alive. It made him feel powerful. For the first time in his life, he was no longer invisible. He was the reason everyone was watching. When asked in one session if he regretted it, he said, "No, but I do miss it. Not her. It. The thrill, the fear, the feeling of something finally happening." The psychologist concluded that Ryan was competent to stand trial. He understood right from wrong. He knew what he was doing, and he knew how to cover it up. He wasn't a madman. He was a man who had built his entire personality around the idea that no one noticed him. And when the one person he thought she'd notice pulled away, he made sure she never could again. It was about erasing the rejection, about rewriting reality in a way that gave him control. His confession wasn't a cry for help. It was a confession of creation. He built the fantasy, controlled it, executed it, and then watched it unfold from the inside. That's what made him dangerous. Not rage, not instability, but emptiness. Because nothing is more dangerous than someone who feels nothing at all, and is willing to destroy something beautiful just to fill the void inside. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, every aisle lined with reporters, camera crews, sketch artists, and spectators clutching tissues and notepads. The walls echoed with whispers, tension so thick it was almost physical. For the small town of Brookridge, this was not just a trial, it was a reckoning. State of New York versus Ryan Geller. He entered quietly, dressed in a gray suit, clean-shaven, his hair trimmed. Calm, detached. Not a single flicker of remorse crossed his face as he was led to the defendant's table. He didn't glance at the gallery. He didn't search the room for familiar faces. He simply sat, as if he were waiting for a meeting. Emma Caldwell's parents sat in the front row. Her mother clutched a handkerchief soaked through before the opening arguments had even begun. Her father stared straight ahead, unmoving, fists clenched in his lap. The prosecution opened with a thunderclap. They presented a timeline, a motive, digital evidence, surveillance footage, a recovered earring, Ryan's own journal entries, and the now famous recording of his partial confession. They told the jury about Emma's final moments, about the bruises, the scratches, the plea for it to stop. They explained how Ryan stalked her for months, documenting her life like a predator studying prey. They painted him not as a man who lost control, but one who planned every second of her disappearance. And just when the jury thought they'd heard the worst, the prosecution dropped the bombshell. A second victim. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Chairs shifted. Reporters scrambled to update their headlines. Even the judge paused before motioning for order. A second girl. Unrelated to Emma. Different town. Different year. Lena Brooks. 16 years old. Vanished in 2014, 3 years before Emma. Her case had gone cold. No witnesses. No body. No suspect. She'd simply disappeared walking home from a bus stop in a neighboring county, about 40 miles from Brookridge. Until now, detectives had re-examined Lena's case while combing through Ryan's storage unit, a space he had rented under a fake name. Inside, they found a shoe. Small, white canvas. Faded pink stripe across the sole. Matched to Lena Brooks through DNA still trapped in the fabric. They also found an envelope. Inside, a photo. A grainy image of Lena walking near a train station. The angle and style eerily similar to the surveillance-style photos Ryan had taken of Emma. And one more item. A press flower. Old. Dried. Taped inside a notebook with the initials LB scrawled next to it. Now there were 2 girls. 2 patterns. 2 trails that led to one man. The defense scrambled. They asked for a delay, challenged the admissibility of the new evidence, called it prejudicial. The judge allowed it, not as proof of guilt in Lena's case, but to establish a behavioral pattern. The jury was silent. The town was shaken. Reporters called it the trial of the century, not because of its scale, but because of what it revealed. That Emma had not been the only one. That Ryan Geller may have started earlier, and that he might have done it again if he hadn't been caught. When Emma's mother took the stand, the courtroom held its breath. Her voice trembled as she described her daughter, not just as a victim, but as a person. Her love for animals. Her dreams of becoming a counselor. Her handwritten notes left on the fridge. The way she always hugged from the side and laughed too hard at her own jokes. She wasn't just someone who died, her mother said. She was someone who lived. Ryan never looked at her. Not once. The prosecution closed a chilling sentence. He didn't just steal a life. He rehearsed it. He recorded it. He stored it behind a wall. And he would have done it again. He probably already has. The defense offered little. They couldn't refute the evidence. The confession. The timeline. The photos. The earring. All they had left was a plea to the jury to consider the fragility of mental clarity and the possibility of diminished capacity. But no one believed it. Not the judge. Not the jury. Not the town. Ryan Geller was found guilty on all counts. Premeditated murder, unlawful confinement, obstruction of justice, and possession of evidence connected to a second unsolved case. The moment the verdict was read, Emma's mother broke down. Her father gripped her hand. The courtroom erupted, not in applause, but in a collective, thunderous exhale. Relief, grief, justice, all crashing together at once. Ryan was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He remained expressionless. As he was led away in handcuffs, someone in the back of the courtroom called out, "Was it worth it?" He didn't turn around. He didn't answer. But maybe he didn't have to, because now the world saw him for what he truly was. Not a lonely man, not a misunderstood soul, but a methodical predator, a collector of moments he had no right to own. And as the courtroom emptied, as the cameras stopped rolling, and as the doors finally closed, one truth lingered in the air. Emma Caldwell hadn't just helped solve her own murder. She had pulled back the curtain on a killer who might have never stopped. She had spoken, even in silence. And this time, everyone listened. The courtroom had fallen into a heavy, almost sacred silence. The verdict had been read. Life without parole. The gavel had struck. Ryan Geller's fate was sealed. But the final chapter hadn't yet been written, because before the court adjourned, the judge turned to the gallery and offered the floor to Emma Caldwell's family. Marlene Caldwell stood up slowly. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked to the front of the courtroom. Her black dress hung loosely on her frame. the weight of grief having etched itself into every inch of her being. But her spine was straight. Her eyes were clear. There was pain, yes, but behind that pain was strength. She stood just a few feet away from the man who had stolen her daughter's life, the man who had smiled in photographs, who had lit candles, who had pretended to be one of them. And then she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room like thunder. "You took my sunshine." She paused. The words landed like stones. That's what I called her, since she was a baby. Sunshine, because she lit up every room she entered. She had a laugh that didn't match her size. She danced in the kitchen when no one was looking. She sang off-key and didn't care. She brought life into this house, into our lives, every single day. Ryan didn't look up. "She wasn't just my daughter," Marlene continued. "She was my reason, my anchor, my joy. And in a moment that you planned, a moment you rehearsed, you stole her from me, from us, from the world." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't break. You watched her. You hunted her. You treated her like a character in some story you made up in your head. And then, when she didn't give you the attention you felt entitled to, you made sure she'd never breathe again. The entire courtroom was silent. You didn't just kill Emma. You tried to erase her, to lock her away behind a wall like she was a possession, a memory you thought you could control. Marlene looked directly at Ryan now, her voice sharper, steadier. "But here's the thing, Ryan. You failed." At that, Ryan looked up, briefly, just for a second. Their eyes met. "You failed," she repeated. "You wanted to make her disappear. But she's more present now than she's ever been. You wanted her to be silent. But now the entire world is hearing her story. You want to control. But she's the one who led them to you. You see that, don't you?" She stepped slightly closer. "She outsmarted you, even in death." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "You took my sunshine, but I will never let you take my voice. I will not be quiet. I will not disappear. I will tell her story. To every reporter, every parent, every teenager who ever feels unsafe, unheard, unprotected. I will say her name every single day." She paused, breathing slowly, steadying herself. Emma was strong, and now I have to be strong for her. She reached into her pocket and unfolded a small, wrinkled piece of paper. Emma's last note, printed from her journal, the one that read, "If anything happens to me, don't trust him." She held it up. "You didn't kill a weak girl, Ryan. You killed a fighter. And fighters don't die quietly." She placed a note on the prosecution's table, turned back to the courtroom, and said one final thing. "I came here broken. I'll leave here grieving, but I will not leave in silence, because silence is how monsters like you hide. Not anymore." With that, she walked away. The judge didn't speak for a moment. Neither did the jury. Even the press held their breath. The gallery, filled with strangers, supporters, and survivors, remained motionless, because what they had witnessed wasn't just a victim statement. It was resistance. It was survival. It was truth, spoken not in legal terms, but in a mother's pain sharpened into purpose. Ryan sat still. He didn't blink, didn't shift, but for the first time since the trial began, he looked shaken, because this was the one voice he couldn't bury, the one truth he couldn't manipulate, the one woman he couldn't silence. As Marlene returned to her seat, her husband took her hand. No words were exchanged. They didn't need any. Emma's name had been spoken. Her voice had been heard. And through her mother, it would echo far beyond that courtroom. Outside, reporters waited. Cameras blinked. Microphones were lifted. But inside, the real story had already been told. The story of a mother. And the word she gave to the world, not just to remember her daughter, but to remind every predator, every manipulator, every killer, "You can take a life, but you will never take our voice." The courtroom had emptied. Emma's parents were quietly escorted out a side door, away from the reporters, away from the flashing lights. The jury was dismissed. The judge retired to chambers. The prosecutors exchanged tired, quiet nods of relief. But in the back of the room, just before Ryan Geller was led away in shackles, something happened. He smiled. Not broadly, not triumphantly, just a subtle curl of the lip, a smile without warmth, without regret, without fear. And then he leaned toward the officer beside him and whispered 7 words. "I have stories no one's heard yet." The officer didn't respond, but he heard it clearly. The words were logged in the official report, not because they were part of the legal record, but because of what they implied. This wasn't over. Not entirely. The case had been closed, the killer convicted, the family given a sliver of justice. But Ryan, calm, calculated, deliberate, had left behind a final seed of doubt. Stories, plural, no one's heard yet. Detectives who had worked the case for over a year gathered in a private conference later that night. Files spread across the table. Names highlighted. Timelines laid out again. They reviewed cold cases from surrounding counties. Girls who had gone missing. Unsolved disappearances. Bodies never recovered. 2 stood out. One, Lena Brooks, whose shoe and photo had already linked Ryan to her presumed death, though charges were still pending. The second, Samantha Vell, age 17, who disappeared in 2012. Similar profile. Brown hair, bright eyes, vanished walking home from a tutoring job. No known connection to Ryan at the time. Until now, because one photo recovered from Ryan's USB drive, a grainy, half-lit image taken from behind a car windshield, matched the date and time Samantha disappeared. The girl in the frame wasn't Emma. It wasn't Lena. It was someone else. Walking alone, headphones in, unaware she was being watched. They hadn't noticed the image before, but now they saw it clearly. A third possible victim. And Ryan knew it. He had left it there, hidden in plain sight, like a breadcrumb. A dare. So when he smiled that day in court, when he whispered his final sentence, it wasn't just bravado. It was a message. He wanted the world to keep looking. He wanted to remain part of the story. Because Ryan Geller didn't crave freedom. He craved attention, control, power, even in chains. Even in a 6x8 prison cell with concrete walls and a steel bed, he could still manipulate from behind the glass, still plant thoughts, still sow fear, still dangle mysteries that might never be solved. He had built a world in which he was no longer invisible. He was infamous, and that's what terrified the investigators the most, because now they had to ask a question they thought they'd buried with a verdict. How many girls are missing because of him? And how many more pieces are still out there, tucked inside notebooks, hidden behind walls, pressed between journal pages, or sealed in plastic bags, waiting to be discovered? In prison, Ryan kept himself. He didn't speak to the other inmates, didn't start fights, didn't cause trouble. But every few weeks, he would request a visit from law enforcement. He would sit across the glass, fold his hands, smile, and say something cryptic like, "You're close, but not quite," or ask her sister about the music box. Each time, detectives left the room with more questions than answers. Some believed he was bluffing. Others weren't so sure, because the pattern was there, the methodology, the obsession. Emma hadn't been a one-time outburst. She had been the final chapter, or maybe just the most visible one, in a longer, darker story. And now the clock was ticking. Ryan had ensured that even from behind bars, his narrative continued, because some killers seek chaos. Someone to watch the world burn. But Ryan, he wanted to be remembered, to be studied, to be feared, to be followed, just like he followed them. So, yes, the gavel had fallen. The sentence had been passed. The justice system had done its part. But as the final chains were locked and the doors slammed shut behind him, the questions still lingered like a shadow on the walls of every cold case room across the state. Is he really done? Or is this just the beginning of what he left behind? And if he has more stories to tell, what will they cost to uncover? The trial was over. The cameras left. The journalists packed up their microphones. The daily updates disappeared from the news cycle. For most of the world, the story of Emma Caldwell had reached its end. But for her family, it was just beginning. Because while Ryan Geller had been sentenced to life in prison, What he had taken from them could never be fully measured in legal terms. He hadn't just ended a life. He had torn open a wound in the fabric of trust, in families, in communities, in the system that was supposed to protect. And Emma's mother refused to let that wound go unanswered. 2 months after the trial, Marlene Caldwell appeared on national television. She wasn't wearing black anymore. Her voice didn't tremble. Her hands didn't shake. She looked straight into the camera and spoke with quiet, burning conviction. We can't bring Emma back, but we can fight to make sure no other family has to go through what we did. And with those words, she launched the Emma Caldwell Foundation for the Voiceless, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting investigations of missing persons, especially in overlooked and under-resourced communities. What started as a local effort, just a single office, a few volunteers, and a website, quickly gained traction. Donations poured in. Families who had felt abandoned by law enforcement found a new place to turn. Cold cases were reopened, leads revisited. Technology and resources that small towns couldn't afford were now being made available through the foundation. Within its first year, the foundation directly contributed to locating 3 missing individuals, all teenagers, all from low-income areas where searches had gone cold and hope had dimmed. One was Ava Martinez, age 15, who had vanished from her home in rural Nebraska. Her case had been deprioritized after 3 weeks, listed as a probable runaway. The Emma Caldwell Foundation provided satellite imaging resources, helped hire a private investigator, and coordinated with a retired FBI profiler. Ava was found alive in a storage unit across state lines, shaken but safe. The second, Devin James, 17, was discovered in an abandoned trailer park after a tipster who saw his poster on the Foundation's website recognized his photo. He had been missing for 6 months. The third, Lily Ramon, was pulled from a human trafficking ring in Chicago. Her name had never even made the news, but the Foundation found her through social media trace analysis, something her local department had neither the training nor funding to pursue. Each rescue was a headline. Each return was a miracle, and each one was a chapter Emma had unknowingly written, because it was her face, her story, that had given others a voice. In every public speech, Marlene reminded the world, Emma was more than her death. She was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a dreamer, a bright light, and now her light is guiding others home. The Foundation partnered with schools to create awareness workshops. It trained law enforcement on recognizing early signs of stalking and digital manipulation. It provided grants to families who couldn't afford to print flyers or hire legal help. It even launched a scholarship program for young women pursuing forensic science and psychology, fields that have been central to uncovering the truth in Emma's case. People began referring to it not just as a foundation, but as a movement, one based not on fear, but on action, not on pain, but on purpose. Emma's story became part of textbooks. Her name was read at national memorials for victims of violent crime. Her photo, that same bright smile once seen on missing posters, was now framed in classrooms, in workshops, in digital safety campaigns. Her story was told in podcasts, documentaries, and high school assemblies. And every time her name was spoken, it meant something more than just loss. It meant warning. It meant awareness. It meant survival. For her family, the pain never disappeared. They still set an extra plate at Thanksgiving. Her room remained untouched. Her scent still lingered in the pillowcases. Grief is not something you get over. It's something you learn to live beside. But in that grief, they had built something indestructible, something Ryan Geller could never take from them. A legacy, a force, a voice that didn't just whisper from beyond, but shouted loudly for those still waiting to be found. Because the real tragedy isn't just losing someone, it's silence. And Emma's family made a vow there would be no more silence. Not for her, not for anyone. Today, across the country, families are finding hope where there was once only despair. Police departments are calling back parents they hadn't spoken to in years. Leads are being followed. Children are being found. And it all began with a girl who refused to go unnoticed, with a mother who refused to be silent, with a family who turned their pain into power, and with a promise: we speak for the voiceless. We search until they're found. And we never, ever stop. 6 months had passed since Ryan Geller was sentenced to life without parole. The town of Brookridge had begun to heal. Emma Caldwell's face no longer appeared in headlines, though her foundation was growing. Her story, though tragic, had transformed into a mission, one her family carried with them every day. But healing, as they would soon discover, isn't always a straight line. And sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. It was a cold afternoon in October when Sophie Caldwell, Emma's younger sister, went to the mailbox. She wasn't expecting much, a utility bill, maybe a few donation envelopes. But mixed in with the usual, she found something strange, a plain white envelope. No return address, no postage mark. It hadn't been mailed. It had been placed there, by hand. The paper was stiff, the kind used in expensive stationery. It was sealed with tape, not glue, no name, no markings, just the family's address written in block letters. She took it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it for almost 10 minutes before opening it. Inside was a single piece of paper. No date, no salutation, just 2 words. Still watching. That was all. No signature, no handwriting style to analyze. Just a clean, printed message, like something from a ransom note in a thriller film. Sophie dropped the paper. Her hands began to tremble. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, stunned, trying to make sense of what she was holding. Because those words, 2 words, shattered the months of progress her family had struggled to build. Still watching. A phrase that was more than just a threat. It was a reminder, a message from someone who knew exactly what it would do to them. Sophie immediately called her mother. Within minutes, the police were at the house. The letter was bagged and taken for fingerprinting, DNA swabbing, paper analysis. But results would take time. And there was no guarantee anything would be found. Because whoever left that letter knew exactly what they were doing. And that led to a terrifying question. Was it Ryan? Could he have orchestrated this from inside prison? He had no internet access. No direct contact with the outside world. All letters in and out were monitored. But he had connections. Fellow inmates, visitors, lawyers, guards. Even a single sympathetic ear could become a courier for something like this. Detectives contacted the prison immediately. Ryan hadn't received any visitors in over 3 weeks. But there was a name logged. Someone who had visited twice in August under the guise of conducting an academic interview on criminal psychology. A young woman, early 30s, graduate student, supposedly, but her credentials didn't check out. The university she claimed to represent had no record of her, no application, no department, no advisor, fake identity, fake purpose, and suddenly what seemed like a closed case cracked open again. Could Ryan have inspired a follower? Someone who read about the case, fixated on it, sympathized with him? Or worse, someone who wanted to continue what he started? Sophie's mind spiraled. She began double-checking the locks, installing extra cameras, walking with her keys between her fingers, just in case. She couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of the porch light, every car that slowed down near the house, it all became a threat. Her mother tried to stay strong, but the letter had undone something. It had reopened a wound just beginning to scar, because now they knew something horrifying. It didn't matter that Ryan was locked away. His influence was still out there, still watching. The media caught wind of the letter. Headlines resurfaced. Speculation reignited. Interviews were requested. Security around the Caldwell home increased. The foundation even received a wave of threatening emails, vague, anonymous, but chilling nonetheless. Psychological profilers weighed in. Some said it was Ryan, manipulating from the shadows. Others believed it was someone else. Someone new, someone disturbed, someone inspired by the spectacle. Because when crimes like this are broadcast across the nation, they don't just terrify people. Sometimes they attract them. Copycats, obsessives, sympathizers, people who see monsters and call them misunderstood. And while law enforcement urged the public not to panic, not to give power to threats Privately, they knew this was serious, because this wasn't just harassment. This was personal. The phrase, "still watching," wasn't random. It was taken directly from Ryan's own words during his second police interview. The recording, later leaked during trial coverage, included Ryan saying, "She used to look around like someone was there. I never got too close. I was just watching." He had even told Detective Harrow, "Even now I see it all. I'm still watching." It had become a haunting signature. And now, someone was using it. Weeks passed. The trail went cold. No new letters. No new leads. But the fear lingered, because this wasn't like before. Before, they were searching for Emma. Now, they were waiting for someone else to emerge. No one knew if the letter was the start of something new, or a final act of cruelty from a man already sentenced. But one thing was clear. The family wasn't safe. Not truly, because trauma doesn't just end with justice. Sometimes it leaves the door open, just enough for darkness to slip back through. And sometimes monsters don't act alone. They leave echoes. They leave shadows. They leave followers. And just when you think it's over, a message arrives in a plain envelope. 2 words. Enough to erase months of healing. Enough to make a family wonder if the nightmare ever really ended. Still watching. In the weeks following the anonymous letter that read, "Still watching," investigators found themselves forced back into a space they thought they had already left behind. They began reviewing Ryan Geller's files again. All of them. Not just the court documents. Not just the confession. Everything. The surveillance photos. The journal entries. The metadata from his USB drive. And it didn't take long before new patterns started to emerge. Hidden beneath the obvious clues, the Emma connection, the cold cases of Lena Brooks, and the possible involvement in Samantha Vell, were subtle markers that didn't fit within the known timeline. 3 names, 3 disappearances, 3 unsolved cases, all within a 60-mile radius. All teenage girls. All had vanished between 2011 and 2016, the years when Ryan had no confirmed criminal activity, no known victims, no public suspicion. But now the possibility was impossible to ignore. The first case reopened was Madison Kerr, age 18. She disappeared in July 2011 after leaving her friend's house in West Meadow, a town only 45 minutes from Brookridge. She had texted her mom saying, "Heading home now, be there soon." But she never made it. Her phone was later found abandoned behind a gas station. Her bag, wallet, and jacket were never recovered. At the time, police believed it was a case of abduction, but with no witnesses, no signs of struggle, and no clear suspects, the case went cold. Now, years later, when compared to Ryan's known behavioral pattern, the similarities were striking. Madison had volunteered at a local community center, the same chain where Emma worked. Her online activity included posts about feeling like someone was watching her, though she never identified who. And most chilling of all, her final browser search was for, "Can someone follow you without a GPS?" The second case was Nina Bell, 17, who vanished in October 2013 after attending a Halloween party. Friends said she left early, claiming she had a headache. She wasn't drunk. She was calm. She told one friend she didn't feel safe, but when asked why, she just shook her head. Later, one of her friends remembered seeing a man across the street. Someone in a hoodie, standing near a light pole, staring in their direction. At the time, they thought it was just a party-goer from another house. But when they were shown a photo of Ryan Geller recently, the friend paused. "He looks familiar," she said, "but I can't be sure." Nina's body was never found. The third case reopened was Jessica Lynn, 16, who went missing in May 2016 while jogging. She ran a route through a wooded trail, alone, every morning before school. Her parents said she had mentioned a man she thought was following her weeks before, someone she saw more than once but couldn't identify. The day she disappeared, her running shoes were found near a trail exit, neatly placed side by side. No signs of struggle, no blood, just an ending. Detectives now believe she might have been stalked over time, watched, studied, just like Emma, just like Lena, And once again, no suspects were ever identified. Until now, because in a cache of GPS data pulled from Ryan's phone, previously dismissed as too broad, were pings that placed him within a 2-mile radius of all 3 girls within 48 hours of their disappearances. That alone wasn't enough to confirm guilt, but was enough to raise a terrifying possibility. What if Emma wasn't beginning? What if she was the end? The climax of a sequence that had gone undetected for years? A slow-burning path of escalating control, from obsession to abduction to murder. And what if everything between, the fake academic visits, the carefully worded whispers, the staged grief, were part of a long, calculated play? Detective Harrow, who had led the original Emma investigation, put it best. I think Ryan was practicing. Each time he got better, bolder, more precise. Emma was the first one we caught him for. But I don't believe for a second she was the first one he chose. Investigators began building timelines, cross-referencing job records, traffic cameras, social media posts, ATM withdrawals, anything that might place Ryan in the orbit of other unsolved cases. What they found were suggestions, not conclusions. Not yet, but suggestions that he moved more than they thought, that his job as a delivery contractor gave him access to rural towns, outlying neighborhoods, and vulnerable people, that his hobbies, hiking, photography, amateur drone surveillance, brought him into spaces where he could watch without being noticed. It was a terrifying realization that Ryan may have haunted these places for years, that his crimes were not just about one girl, but about many, all connected by silence, all erased until now. And that was the scariest part, because if there were more victims, how many of them were never found? How many families are still waiting, still hoping, still checking their phones for calls that will never come? And how many of them don't even know Ryan Geller's name? Yet, law enforcement agencies across 3 counties are now working together, something that hadn't happened before Emma. The Emma Caldwell Foundation has offered funding for advanced DNA testing, psychological profiling, and digital forensic reconstruction. And Emma's mother, still reeling, said in a recent interview, "If there are more, we'll find them. We owe them that. We owe their families that." Ryan thought he buried the truth, but the truth always comes up for air. The puzzle is far from finished. The pieces are still out there, in the woods, in evidence boxes, in unread files, in the minds of people who remember things they didn't realize mattered. And as the investigation widens, so does the question that haunts them all. Was Emma the final victim, or just the last one they found? Sometimes justice doesn't bring peace. Sometimes a verdict doesn't silence the voices that still scream in the back of our minds. Emma Caldwell's story was supposed to end in the courtroom. A sentence, a locked door, a gavel. But as we've seen, the echoes remain. Because her death wasn't just a crime. It was a symptom of a world where the quiet ones are often overlooked, where warning signs go ignored, where stalking is minimized, where disappearances are treated like accidents until it's too late. And most terrifying of all, Ryan Geller wasn't some shadowy figure hiding in the woods. He was there, at the vigils, in the community, holding hands with the people he hurt, smiling at the cameras, lighting candles, pretending. And even now, behind bars stripped of freedom, he continues to reach beyond the walls, with letters, with whispers, with threats, with riddles. He wanted to be noticed. He wanted to feel important. And somewhere along the way, he discovered the most horrifying truth of all, that terror can be a kind of legacy if you feed it long enough. But that doesn't mean he gets the final word. You do, the viewers, the listeners, the witnesses, because the stories we tell shape the justice we demand. So if this story shook you, don't let it fade. Tell someone. Share it. Let it sit heavy in the hearts of those who believe monsters are just fiction. Talk about what we missed, about how close he came, about what it means when someone says, "I feel like I'm being watched," and no one listens. Leave a comment. Speak a name. Ask the hard questions. Who do you think his next victim would have been? How many did he already take? And how many more are still waiting to be found? And most importantly, subscribe to Crime Chronicles Confidential, because this isn't just a channel. It's a place where silence dies, where secrets speak, where stories like Emma's are not buried in a headline and forgotten the next day, but held, honored, and remembered. There are still families waiting for justice, still victims without names, still monsters hiding in plain sight. And we're not done. We will keep telling these stories, because some crimes demand to be remembered, and some voices, like Emma's, refuse to stay silent. So stay with us. Watch, listen, share, speak, and never look away, because the moment you stop paying attention is the moment they start watching again. 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 Start